So, what's a global institution's most valuable possession? Is it gold, priceless art, all that real estate? Well, for 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has had a consistent and frankly a pretty radical answer. It's an answer that really challenges how we think about wealth, power, and what we owe to each other. Okay, let's get into it.
To get this, we have to go all the way back to 3rd century Rome. It was a time of intense persecution. The story goes that a deacon, a guy named Lawrence, was ordered by the Roman prefect to hand over all the treasures of the church. Lawrence said, "Okay, give me 3 days." When he came back, he wasn't hauling chests of gold or silver. He showed up with the city's poor, the sick, the marginalized, all of them. Pointing right at them, he declared, "These are the treasures of the church." And for that incredible act of defiance, he was martyred.
Now that story isn't just some historical tidbit. No, it's the key. It's the key that unlocks the why behind 2 millennia of the church's relationship with the poor. So, what is this treasure, really?
At its very core, the teaching is this: the poor are not a social problem we need to solve. They're not a statistic. They are seen as the very flesh of Christ. And that's not just some nice poetic phrase. It is a deep theological claim that says when you encounter a person in poverty, you are actually encountering the divine. And this slide really shows you just how countercultural that idea is. I mean, look at the contrast. On one side, you have a common temptation, right, to see someone suffering as an annoyance, maybe an obstacle, or worse, an idler, a piece of refuse, a problem for someone else to deal with. But the church's view demands seeing something totally different, a human being with dignity, a brother or a sister, a creature loved by God. It's a completely different way of seeing.
So that's the core belief. But has it actually been put into practice? I mean, it's a nice idea, but what does the history look like? Well, the sources show this vast and consistent tradition, built not on some abstract program, but on direct personal encounters. And you see, it's this unbroken thread running through history. I mean, it starts right at the beginning, in the 1st century, with this thing called the diaconia, which was basically a ministry of service. And it runs all the way through the centuries to modern figures we all know, like St. Teresa of Calcutta. The names change, the places change, but that fundamental action of welcoming and serving the poor as if they were Christ himself, that stays constant.
The early church fathers were especially passionate about this. St. John Chrysostom, he was this fiery preacher in 4th century Constantinople. He basically argued that you can't separate true worship from caring for the poor. Think about what he's saying here. It is pointless to cover an altar in gold if Christ himself is starving outside in the person of a poor man. For him, charity wasn't some optional extra, it was the prerequisite for any authentic worship.
And if you thought that was intense, he went even further. He framed this whole thing not as us being generous, but as an act of justice. Just let that quote sink in for a second. Not giving to the poor is stealing from them. He's reframing everything we think about possessions. The teaching here is that our surplus, what we have left over, doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to those who have nothing. So giving isn't just a nice gesture, it's restoring what is rightfully theirs. Wow.
And this belief, this radical idea, it led to incredibly concrete actions that literally shaped civilization. We're talking about the first free public schools, the foundations of modern hospitals. There were entire religious orders founded for the sole purpose of ransoming and freeing slaves, sometimes even trading their own lives to do it. This wasn't just talk, it was action.
Okay, so this tradition of direct care is deep, it's powerful. But in the modern era, the church's social teachings started asking a new and maybe even deeper question. Is it enough to just feed the hungry? Or do we also have to ask why they are hungry in the first place?
And this led to a pretty big evolution in thinking. So step 1, the call to charity, that direct personal care. That's the foundation. It never ever goes away. But it gets complemented by step 2, a demand for justice. And that means you have to start analyzing and even challenging the very systems, the structures, the ideologies that create and keep poverty going on a massive scale.
So a key concept that comes out of this is the preferential option for the poor. Now that doesn't mean an exclusive option like nobody else matters, but it does signal a special priority. It's saying that in a world with such massive, systemic poverty, we have to deliberately focus on the needs, the dignity, and, this is crucial, the voices of the most vulnerable people.
And to analyze the problem, another concept was developed, structures of sin.
This sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty straightforward. It's about how our individual choices, things like greed or just looking the other way, can get baked into our social, our political, and our economic systems. And then those structures kind of take on a life of their own, creating widespread injustice that crushes the poor. And the teaching doesn't pull any punches. I mean, look at this quote. It's a direct challenge to economic ideologies that say the market should have absolute autonomy, with no regulation for the common good. It's a warning that when financial speculation gets prioritized over human dignity, this invisible tyranny can pop up that just relentlessly imposes its own rules and makes the gap between the rich and poor even wider.
So this whole long tradition, right, from a Roman deacon in the 3rd century all the way to modern social teaching, it ultimately brings us right back to a final, very personal point, a challenge to our own indifference.
And time and again, the sources come back to the parable of the Good Samaritan. We all know the story. A guy is beaten, robbed, left for dead on the side of the road. Some religious figures see him, and they cross to the other side. But then an outsider, a Samaritan, he's the one who stops to help. The story just forces us to confront our own reaction when we see suffering. Do we stop, or do we just look the other way? And that leads to this really direct, really incisive question. This isn't about judging anybody else, it's about looking in the mirror. When you're confronted with someone in need, which character are you? The one who's too busy, too important, or the one who stops? And here's the kicker. The story doesn't end with a warm, fuzzy feeling or a nice thought. It ends with a command, a mandate for action. Go and do likewise. The whole tradition we've been talking about isn't something to just be admired from a distance. It's meant to be lived out.
But wait, there is one final, really provocative twist here. This isn't a one-way street where we, the helpers, give to them, the helpless. No, modern church teaching insists that the poor are not passive objects of our charity. They are subjects, they are agents of their own destiny, and they possess a wisdom that we often lack.
And this, right here, is the ultimate challenge. What if we're the ones who need help? The teaching concludes that we have to allow ourselves to be evangelized by the poor, to recognize that because of what they've been through, they understand something fundamental about life, about faith, about survival, that we desperately need to learn. So the final question isn't just what can we give to the poor, but what mysterious wisdom are we ready to receive from them?